Greetings, I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Book Report. If you've been listening to me for a while, you'll know that one of my favorite t-shirt slogans is never judge a book by its movie. The books are always a lot better. In fact, whenever I hear of a movie coming out, the first thing I do is not run off to see the movie, which tends to not be a very pleasant experience these days. You notice you're either one of two or three people in the theater, the other two probably involved in a drug deal or something, or you're one of an overcrowded bunch, half of which are talking or playing with their smartphones or both. No, the first thing I do is if a movie's coming out, I check to see what book it was based on, if any, and I found that this past week. The movie is The Order, starring Jude Law, which covers a group of white separatists called The Order by law enforcement and the press back in the early 1980s, which terrorized much of the United States by robbing banks and, in some cases, assassinating people. And they did so in the name of race and to separate from the United States because they felt their culture and their civilization was being destroyed. Something you're hearing a lot about these days in sort of a repeat. In short, this covers a series of events involving a group that was headed up by a man named Robert Matthews. Mr. Matthews was a typical all-American boy born in the 1950s who got involved in a racialist philosophy, and it's a tragic tale all around of not just him, but everyone he was involved in, everyone that was harmed by this set of incidents. And we're still feeling the results of that today. In fact, much of the resurgence of things you've been seeing in the last few decades involving what is called white nationalism came about from events that started back then. Now, the book, The Secret Brotherhood by Kevin Flynn and Gary Gephardt, came out in 1989. It was published by the Free Press, which was an imprint of Macmillan. And it was extremely well researched. Now, this is back in the days before the internet, before email was a thing. This was a book that was researched over a period of a couple of years and has enormous detail in it. And I'm going to outline something I discovered, which I don't think anyone has picked up on. And you can only do this through books, through real research. These days, books are quite superficial. Back then, you had to have a bibliography, you had to have all sorts of details, interviews. It was very, very well done. And you're going to get far more information out of this 400-page book than you will in watching a movie, or even just reading some cursory reports online. Well, let me tell you something. The book does cover all the background of how that organization came into being. It basically was an offshoot of something called Aryan Nations, the National Alliance headed up by a man named William Pierce, most famous for a rather infamous book called The Turner Diaries. This covers the lives of the people who came into that sort of movement, why they got there, and where it led them, which was basically death and destruction. Now, there's a lot to the book. There's a lot to the story. There's the story of the murder of a talk show host named Alan Berg, a lawyer who fell victim to the bottle and basically just got into the arrogant radio talk show host circuit, which was such a big thing at the time. It's a fascinating tale, but it's a sad tale. Now, I said, when you read books, you learn more, and you might make connections and come up with discoveries. In reading this book, I found out that Mr. Matthews had been working for a mine in northern Idaho, not too far from his estate, if you can call it that, his settlement, his farm. And the story explained how he lost his job at this mine. The mine was called the Bunker Hill Mine. It was part of a major corporate conglomerate. And I found that interesting. I said, I wonder why that place was closed down. And I checked, and it turned out it was a toxic site. It was a mine that produced silver and lead. And many of the people there were contaminated with extremely toxic levels of lead in their blood. Now, Mr. Matthews, it turns out, was a supervisor there. He had actually worked his way up because of his leadership abilities, and he had gotten into a position of authority, but he spent a lot of his time in that mine. More details reveal that were not mentioned in the book because they didn't become a thing for some years later, that place was a Superfund cleanup at some point. In fact, the river running through there was so toxic, it was gray, and it was called the Lead River by some of the local occupants. Bridges had to be repaired more often up there. These guys were poisoned. And you wonder if that's the reason the man took the path he did or got into the direction he did. But you see, you're not going to find this stuff in movies. In fact, when you do real research, you make a discovery, and to the best of my knowledge, no one has made a discovery about the life of Mr. Matthews like this. It turns out he couldn't have children too easily. His wife had miscarriages. You see? This is what you get when you delve into things. Now, the book itself, I think, is an important piece of history. It's not in print. I was able to find a copy up at archive.org, and I recommend people go there to find books that are out of print and read them. It was very well written, very easy to read, and it will give you a good perspective as to where this came from. Now, one thing that's not covered, and this is an important thing as we are in an age with some fanaticism here and there, including at the federal level, is all people who take extremist views of things, whether they be white separatists like Mr. Matthews or Antifa or anybody into the woke movement. Everything has a reason. Things like this just don't pop into existence. I haven't seen the movie, don't plan on it, but I'm sure it has plenty of gunfights and a lot of intrigue and maybe a few sex scenes, as Hollywood loves to throw in. It's not generally known, but much of this came from the destruction of the family farm back in the 1980s and into the 1990s. When you separate people from their land and their culture and you take away their roots, which is still going on, courtesy of the mainstream media, left-wing wokeism that you see in universities, it drives people crazy, and it did back then. Basically, what really started all this was the destruction of the family farm in the United States. That's something that's never really been covered too much. It was covered back then by those of us who were following this, and it culminated in the Oklahoma City bombing of 1995. This is an important thing to learn, is that fanaticism does not come into existence in a vacuum. There's always a reason, there's a cause and effect. It was really heartbreaking to read about all the people that got involved in this sort of thing and all the people who were hurt by it. Where their lives probably could have gone if they had focused their energies and their intellect into other directions. I don't know if that's how it's covered in the movie, again, but I would suggest reading this book, whether or not you see the movie, because this is a part of American history which we are still feeling the effects of. Remember, it's more important to drink from the fountain of knowledge than it is to gargle at it, and we have too many garglers these days. So that's the book I recommend you look into. It's out of print. It should get back into print because I found the bibliography to be quite fascinating in and of itself. Again, these gentlemen back in the day of 1989 did a great job of documenting a rather sad part of American history. The Secret Brotherhood by Kevin Flynn and Gary Gephardt. The Free Press put it out in 1989, an imprint from Macmillan. You can still find it used, but you can get it up online in a few locations, including archive.org, where you can borrow it. They only have apparently one copy, so I had to wait in line a little bit when I was reading it. So that's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends and share with your enemies. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X, formerly known as Twitter. I don't like to say that too much, but it's almost a catchphrase. You can find me there at MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. The Aurelian Column is up on Telegram and a few other places. I can be found on social media, but you will never, ever, ever find me again on Facebook. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, keep reading. Good day.